You may have heard this quote that the devil's greatest trick was to convince the world that he doesn't exist. So in this vein, one of the biggest obstacles on a spiritual path is spiritual ego, and particularly to think that you don't have ego, that you've overcome it. So in this Soulcast episode, we're going to explore 5 types of subtle ego, and we can all check whether we're not influenced by these from time to time, or even in a major way. So my name is Gillian Soers, and I've been exploring with a lot of interest all aspects related to consciousness as a Raja Yoga meditation student and teacher, but also as a professional development trainer for over 30 years now. So before we look at these 5 different types of subtle ego, it'd be good to start with a definition of what is actually ego. And this is a definition from a good friend and colleague of mine, Mike George. And he said that ego is attachment to a false or a wrong image of yourself. And so essentially what that means is taking your identity from something that you're not. And for those on a spiritual path, anything but your true identity as a spiritual being, meaning it could be something gross, you're like strongly identifying with your football team, but could also be something more subtle, such as when we use phrases like, oh, I'm so depressed. What we don't realize is that by attaching I to a word like depressed, we're essentially making that an identity and therefore deepening our experience of that. And so the first one of these 5 things that we can get attached to is spiritual concepts, but also being attached to an image of myself as being wiser than others. So essentially spiritual truth is in all souls, but what happens is that we can get very attached to concepts that make us feel secure in the way that we see the world. So we're getting our safety not from really within the self, but within a mental model that we rely on. And we can particularly tell if we're attached to those concepts when we talk about them a lot to other people, not in an attitude of service, but an attitude of boosting my ego and trying to project an image of being wise. Now, of course, every time you speak knowledge or share knowledge on any sort of platform, it doesn't necessarily indicate that you're operating from ego, but definitely ego loves to jump in and feed off any sort of time that you're sharing knowledge or wisdom or anything of higher knowledge with other people. Okay, so the second aspect that we can often build an identity from, and that is from our lifestyle and how pure we think our lifestyle is, how much renunciation of gross pleasures we think we've had. Now again, just like truth is within the soul, so is purity. But in the absence of the experience of the true self, we can often create a false image of ourselves based on these factors. And then we compare our lifestyle to others. So this could be how early you wake up, what's your diet, what's your lifestyle, anything, are you minimalist? Anything that you feel indicates to the world or to yourself that somehow you're more pure than the average person, the ego is going to have a good feed off that. Yeah, so not experiencing yourself as a pure being, but building an image as a pure person based on lifestyle and diet and habits. Okay, so the third one, now this is a tricky one because it's attaching my identity to someone who I believe is more spiritual than myself. Now, of course, many of us, in fact, I'd say probably everybody on a spiritual path has benefited from those who have gone before. And so it can often be humility actually to learn from other people. But what the ego tends to do is, again, instead of realizing the self as a spiritual being, which is incorporeal, beyond these characters, we tend to look at a character out there, someone who portrays traits that we think kind of singles them out as being a higher person in some way. And then we put them up on a pedestal. And then we often have ego that I'm the one close to that person. I'm promoting that person. They think I'm special. So there's a whole web of kind of identities that we can create around our special person and our relationship with that special person. But as long as we're identifying with a character, and so really when we're attaching ourselves to a person, we're really attaching themselves to an external character that we can see. Because on a soul level, we all have the same truth, the same qualities. And when we realize that, we see ourselves as equal to all souls. Now, on the human level, we can actually learn from anyone. But it can be a real trap to just put one person up there and project all these things onto them and then compare ourselves to them and put ourselves down and then give our life in service to that person. Okay, so the fourth one is creating an identity out of experiences. And even the desire for spiritual experiences can be a kind of a trap. Because again, experiences are fleeting, then turn into memories, and then we try to keep them alive by maybe telling people about the experience that we had. But realizing the self is actually based on clarity, realizing the truth. And although sometimes experiences can add to that realization of who we are, essentially an experience is not the self. It's something that happens to the self, and like a cloud, it kind of comes and goes. But the ego can again adopt the mantra of more, more, more. And I've seen this with people who have often had a lot of kind of psychedelic experiences, shamanic journeys, intense experiences that on a meditation path, they're looking for that high. Whereas actually realizing the self is more like a quiet, subtle clarity that comes upon you and transforms your whole way of thinking. Okay, so then the fifth trap or kind of limited identity that we can get attached to, and this is to do with manifesting. So a lot of people on a spiritual path are really into the idea that my thoughts create my reality, and particularly if they get into using methods to enhance that, so affirmations, visualizations, vision boards. And then when they start to happen, I then create a story around, wow, my spiritual level must be very high. I just think and then it happens. Now, of course, it indicates something. It indicates that the method is working for you, and those methods do work. But again, why I say there is a trap, because in a sense, it's like the mind is like a tool, or in a sense, like a toy. And you're learning to play with the toy, and you're going, whoa, I created this, I created that, I got this, I got that, I got this person, that thing, that opportunity. And we can get so trapped in that actually, again, we do not experience the true silence of the inner being. We do not realize the self that is so far beyond the matrix. And so this mind is playing with this level of reality and making things happen. But it's still manifesting within the matrix, whereas realizing the self is really, who am I out of this whole picture? Before I entered this physical matrix, this world, this playground, who will I be when I leave it? And so to realize yourself as an eternal, timeless spiritual being, yes, learning about the power of the mind might be a step in realizing the spiritual nature of the self, but don't get stuck there. Who is the power behind it? So this is just 5. I'm sure there's many, many more traps. Maybe you can add in the comment section some of what you think are the subtle egos. Maybe we'll make another video with another 5. But for now, I think is a good way to start. So how much do I build my identity around being wise, particularly wiser than other people? How much do I base my self-esteem, my image on my lifestyle and how disciplined or pure or renunciate, I believe I am. Third one, getting attached to the image of others. And usually that image is a projection, and then I compare myself. This is another big ego trap. And then the fourth one, getting trapped in seeking spiritual experiences instead of realizing the one behind the spiritual experiences, the eternal self that is experiencing. And then fifth, getting stuck on getting high on how you're manifesting and creating an identity about being a master manifester. Again, instead of realizing you are the power behind the mind, not the mind itself. And yes, the mind does magic, but you're much more powerful than that. So thank you for listening, and look forward to your feedback and maybe hints of other subtle spiritual traps that you think that we should all watch out for. Thank you for listening. And if you like this sort of content, please do like, comment, subscribe. This will all help the channel to grow. And see you in the next video.